Okay, good Friday morning, everyone. Welcome to the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist series. My name is Tim, and I will be your host today for the finale of a three-part series of species named after calendar months. So we started with the mayfly, then last week we focused on the Juneberry, and now we finish up with the Junebug. And on our Explore Milwaukee's Backyards last month, I was with Eric and Marilyn. I was reminded of one more species that I forgot, the May apple, but that's going to have to wait until next year because you can't do a May apple show in July. So sit back. Maybe this time you have a bowl of sweet Juneberries at your side to complement your mug of hot or cold coffee as we explore the stories of the Junebug in episode 43 of season 4 of the Backyard Naturalist, Henry and Junebug. With a nod to PBS, we'd like to thank all of the viewers joining us today, live or recorded. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And I would especially like to thank our subscribers who keep the series running. Season 5 starts in September, and we'd be honored if you'd consider renewing your membership for the next season and the host of benefits that comes with your renewal. But most importantly, it keeps this program accessible and sustainable. And every Friday morning at 9 a.m., I enjoy hanging out with all of you. Also, our next Explore Milwaukee's Backyard field trip will be in a little over a week on July 8th. We're going to head over to me, is one of the more underappreciated areas in the city, the county, Falk Park on the south side of the county. It's just a beautiful park. It's an ecological gem. It has maybe one of the healthiest populations of reptiles in the county, especially salamanders. These trips are open to everyone and free for subscribers. So hope you can join us for a nice morning hike next Saturday. Oftentimes this is an afternoon hike, but we got tickets to Imagine Dragons on Saturday, and that I had to shift the hike up to the morning for that reason. And before we get started on the feature critter, our backyards are connected to the heavens above, and just a couple quick updates from the world of space exploration and astronomy. Tomorrow, July 1st, is the scheduled launch date of the Euclid telescope. This is a European Space Agency mission, and like a lot of these missions are today, it's a joint collaboration. So it's a European mission being launched here in the United States from Cape Canaveral, because we have access to areas that are closer to the equator, which is where you want to launch rockets from. And it is inside of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. And the goal of this mission is to build a 3D map of the universe. And that's going to help us study the mysteries of dark energy and dark matter, the dark side. And then next week, Thursday, July 6th, is another kind of astronomical milestone. The Earth will be at aphelion, which means we are at our farthest point from the sun in the elliptical orbit. So happy aphelion next week, Thursday. And today we are talking about Junebugs. And the first problem that we run into is the fact that there are many types and groups of insects to which we humans have given the name Junebug, but we can start by saying with relative confidence that Junebugs are a type of beetle. And we've had some fantastic past episodes on beetles, because there are a lot of beetles on Backyard Naturalist. One of my favorites was given by the amazing Heidi Meyer. And we also have an episode on a particular type of beetle that we call the ladybug or the ladybird beetle. And there is also an episode on another iconic group of beetles, the lightning bugs or fireflies. So this group alone represents just such a powerhouse. I mean, each of these groups alone represent powerhouse groups of beetles that are recognizable to most, and colloquially have all these different names. Like Robin Wall-Kimmerer last week told us that the more names something has in different cultures, probably it's more important to humanity. And so, are they fireflies or lightning bugs, ladybugs or ladybird beetles, June bugs or June beetles? And then what actually constitutes a June beetle? Beetles are a huge group, so big that roughly 1 out of every 4 described animals in the world is a beetle. Coleoptera, they have that hard outer wing that covers a inner, more delicate flying wing. We can also say with relative confidence that if you're calling something a Junebug, it's in the family Scarabeidae, or the scarab beetle family, which is a very well-known group of beetles, and maybe even better known to earlier humans, with over 30,000 species that we know of. Huge range of size and colors, often with a beautiful metallic sheen, beautiful colors, different sizes. Many of them are diggers. They are often very sensitive to smells, have these really cool antennae. Some of them have these really big horns that use for combat. If you are a gardener, chances are at some point you may have dug up a larval scarab beetle. I just found one in my parents' garden last spring, and the larvae develop underground. They're usually kind of a pale yellow or creamy white. They can be very big. And when you see them, they're often in that C shape. It's kind of a defensive position when you dig them up out of the ground, because they're developing underground. Adult scarabs are usually nocturnal. A few years ago, we found a beautiful adult scarab beetle, a goldsmith beetle, on an evening bat survey at Washington Park. So they are around in our neighborhoods if you're looking for them. They're just usually around at night. And I've had many cool run-ins with scarab beetles here in Milwaukee and the tropics. Some beautiful metallic gold and silver, bright copper colors. But Robin's on this call, and she knows my favorite scarab beetle story, which took place up on Chambers Island at dusk while we were on the beach, and we just started to hear and see these massive, insects flying down from the bluffs, and it was a huge group of rhinoceros beetles that were just flying en masse, and it looked like they were all in this kind of like a military formation, like paratroopers, that they were just coming down. And they're not good flyers. This group in general are not good flyers, so sometimes you kind of had to duck or get out of their way. And these are really big beetles, so it was a little scary to get hit on the side of the head by this massive beetle. But they're not very good flyers, and as a group, so that was a fascinating nature moment for me. A quick who's who of scarab beetles brings us to some familiar species and groups, starting with the Japanese beetle, which is a beautiful beetle that unfortunately has become invasive here in the US. The always fun, super important dung beetles, which just have an amazing adaptations of their own and serve a very important purpose. One of my favorite research projects had to do with somebody who basically studied to see how their diet affected their poop, to see what attracted more dung beetles, and something we can talk about later. There are groups called rose chafers, rhinoceros beetles, Hercules beetles, Goliath beetles, fantastic names, all members of the scarab beetle family. And as anybody who's ever seen the movie The Mummy knows, that in ancient Egypt, a type of dung beetle, a type of scarab dung beetle, Scarabaeus sacer, was revered as sacred, and amulets representing these beetles were traded throughout the Mediterranean world, which is again why I think in the earlier humans this was maybe more of a well-known beetle. So it is in this illustrious family that we find the June beetles, and we're going to say that June beetles, for the most part, belong to a very large genus called the Philophaga. Almost 1,000 species in this one genus, and then straight away we're going to dive headlong into confusion, because here are the common names for the insects in this genus. They are the May beetles, the Junebugs, and the July beetles. So can't make up our mind here. Essentially, these names, as it may suggest, are based on when we as humans start to notice them. So that partly depends on where you are in the world. In May, the earliest that we'll see them is May, and that's when they emerge from the soil as adults. So they spend their egg, larvae, pupal life underground, sometimes for several years. And then just like a good cicada, after the time underground, they start to emerge as adults. And in June, they're much more active and they're starting to lay eggs, and they're laying eggs into July and August. So again, depending on where you are in the world and what you're noticing, what you're looking for, these have, they're May, June, or July bugs or beetles. The word philophaga means leaf eater. So philo is leaf, phagos means eater. And then you can kind of see in this adult that the fanned out antenna ends, an adaptation that allows them to detect chemicals in the air very well. So as a group, the scarab beetles, particularly if you're dung beetle, you need to know where the dung is. And so they're very, very, very sensitive to chemicals in the air. The life cycle is the typical beetle life cycle. So when the female lays her eggs, and that'd be the midsummer, she will create these little chambers underground and lay 50 to 100 or more eggs, one in each chamber. And then in an interesting twist, the shape of the egg changes as the embryo develops. So they start out in more of an elliptical shape, and then as the embryo develops, it becomes more spherical, and then they hatch into these adorable little Junebug babies. And you start to see that C shape. They have little spiracles that hang out. The typical Junebug pattern is that they will molt twice in that larval form before the winter, and then they'll overwinter underground as a grub, and they're pretty much eating the roots of plants, especially grasses, before pupating, and they can remain in the stage for several years. And because of this, one of the themes of this group is that they tend to be agricultural pests, whether it's your garden, your tomatoes, or whether you are a large-scale gardener. They spend their life, most of their life, they spend underground eating the roots of lettuce and strawberries, raspberries, potatoes, maybe that young ornamental shrub you just planted. And part of that depends on how healthy your garden is. If you have a monoculture, you're probably open to more attack, that these grubs see this huge party, this huge buffet. An indication that your plants might have a Junebug larvae, other than kind of they might start to wilt. But if you see a lot of birds, especially crows, that kind of start to peel away the grass, they're looking for these juicy Junebug grubs. That's one of the things that farmers look for, and especially in the west coast of the US, the European chafe beetle has started to become a pest. And then one of the ways that people see them is they see the crows gathering to eat the grubs that are just below the surface, eating those grasses. And depending on what kind of plant community you have, if you have a lawn with turf grass, or if you have a golf course, these can be really, really, really bad. But if you have a kind of native planting yard, or you don't care so much about your grass, then it's not as big of a deal. In the grub stage, they're vulnerable to not only crows, but these other adorable predators like skunks and voles. Adult Junebugs are often called chafers, and as the name of their genus implies, they eat leaves above ground, and that's mainly off of trees and shrubs. At this stage, so they can continue to be a pest at this stage, but this is when they become hugely important for your local animal community. So they are a frequent prey item for spiders and snakes and frogs and birds and bats and rodents. So that's an important purpose that they serve, is feeding the above ground community. And then both adults and grubs are vulnerable to insect parasites like purgative flies, bee flies, and wasps, who will either lay their eggs on an adult beetle, and then the egg hatches and the larvae kind of goes into the living adult kills it and eats it up from the inside. They will also parasitize the eggs and the larvae. And yeah, again, the basis for a lot of horror stories for young Junebugs. Both. So anyway, that's, in some ways, that's the Junebug. And, you know, what surprised me most this week is that there's so many times that I end an episode and I'm like, you know, I didn't think there'd be that much to say about such and such a species. And oftentimes I'll say, oh, I really need a part 2 or a part 3. And to me, it was almost the opposite with the Junebug. I was expecting, oh, Junebugs, that's, you know, they're really important. There's a lot to say about them. There's almost 1,000 species, but there's not a lot out there on the Junebug. Almost every source of information on Junebugs comes from pest control companies who say, here's how to get rid of the Junebugs. And if this were an episode on scarab beetles, then yes, there would definitely be, you know, with all their history and all, you know, it's a much bigger group, there would definitely have to be a part 2 or part 3. And so that's what I was really reflecting on, and why I asked the question, you know, to you all beforehand, what you know about this. I think 2 likely factors involved here, why there's just not a lot of information out there. I mean, we could get into the identification stuff and some other things, but first of all, as adults, they're nocturnal. So, you know, unless you're by a light at night or you hear them, you know, as Maggie said, crashing into your windows or your screens, we don't interact with them a lot. So we will start to notice them this time of year. But, you know, and then they're live most of their life underground. But they don't have this spectacular emergence like the 17-year cicadas. So it's a very common group, but there's just not a lot that we know about them that really piques our interest. They don't light up at night. They don't emerge in spectacular formation. They don't leap 1,000 times their body mass. They don't eat book bindings. They don't have that grotesque look that scares us. They're kind of button-shaped cute, you know, but maybe not to the extent of ladybugs. So I'm going to kind of maybe make some enemies here, but I'm going to call this a pretty ordinary group of insects. But that's also maybe what made me like them even more now. Like, to me, this is your working class, blue collar. I come to work, I drive a Honda Civic. This is the insect that just doesn't stand out, or hasn't really stood out to humanity that much. And I couldn't even think of one species in this group that's like the recognizable one, like the monarch butterfly. And there's like, you know, 1,000 named species. So we know them as Junebugs. We could probably see a Junebug. Maybe if you have a garden, if you maintain a garden, maybe there's some pest species that you might be able to point out. But to me, as a group, the Junebugs are Junebugs. There's not one particular species, and there's really nothing that like jumps out at me. It's like, oh, there's a Junebug. And even then, sometimes I don't even know for sure that I'm looking at a Junebug. So it's kind of like this ordinary group. There are some scarabs outside this genus that are still called Junebugs, that are more recognizable to farmers in particular. So there's the green June beetle, the 10-line June beetle, the fig eater beetle, and the European chafer. None of those are in the Junebug genus. They're all fairly ordinary again, and I'm using the term ordinary as there's nothing that really jumps out at you. They're beautiful. They have amazing adaptations, their biology, everything like that, but there's not like that one part that the story really grabs, except the fig eater beetle. And the fig eater beetle, when they're in the larval stage, maybe they recognize too that, oh man, like us June beetles are really boring, so I'm going to do something different. And so they went rogue, and they decided that they're only going to move on their backs. They flip over upside down and they walk on their backs. So we give them the name crawly backs. That's for real. That's what they're called, crawly backs. So then you imagine like the family tree of Junebugs are full of these ordinary, respectable Sam the Eagle bugs. But every once in a while they have to talk about their cousin, the crawly backs. They're a little embarrassed. They hide their photos in the back. They roll their eyes when they have to talk about them. But then even these crawly backs, when they grow up and become adults, they turn into respectable, ordinary Junebugs, like I'm sure their parents wanted them to. So I kind of thought we were at the end. Again, there's just not a lot to say about this group. But then I found this other kind of interesting part about how Junebugs are seen in humanity and culture. Again, there's not that one species that really we all know about, but as a group, they've kind of captured the imagination of humanity in subtle ways. It just wasn't that like in your face way. So there's a movie, Junebug, that won all kinds of awards. I think it was the first Academy Award for Amy Adams. There are at least 6 bands that have written or performed a song called Junebug, including the B-52s, which is the last band that I saw at the Marcus Amphitheater before I go and see Imagine Dragons. So there's sung about. The lyrics don't have, from what I understand, anything to do with actual Junebugs for these songs. It's the name of several characters in comics and video games, but never the main character. There's an old Dale Earnhardt Jr., maybe that's one of the more popular. His nickname, if you're into racing, is the Junebug. And there's Jose Almeida was a DJ, and his name was DJ Junebug. And his death is the subject of a documentary. There is an old airplane called the Junebug. There's a cocktail called the Junebug. And then maybe my favorite is an old personal computer from the 80s, the Amiga 600, that has the nickname Junebug, but that was named after the B-52 song. So you can kind of see where that fit in the cultural. So I kind of ran into this, I mean, you could call it a treasure of human culture of Junebugs, but even in all of these examples, maybe apart from a couple exceptions, they're all pretty obscure references. They're minor characters. They're forgotten items. I've never had a Junebug cocktail. It doesn't mean I'm sure I've seen it on a menu before. It's so to me, this is kind of an additional reflection to and I'm gonna use the word ordinary. It's not flashy, and to me, one of my favorite characters is humility. So this is all making me love this group of insects even more. Even with all of these cultural references that are kind of obscure, only one of them actually refers to the insect. It's a character in a Disney comic. Everything else, it makes a really good nickname, I think, calling somebody a Junebug. So my take on this is that I'm really happy that this is the story of the Junebug. I think they're beautiful. I think they're fascinating. They've adapted very well. They're a super important part of a healthy ecosystem. And they just go about this kind of out of sight, out of mind. They don't want to be noticed. They're around at night under the ground, nothing fancy, nothing flashy. They don't bite, they don't sting. They're small and inconspicuous. They can be annoying. As we mentioned, they're a bit clumsy. They're poor flyers. They're attracted to that light, and they might bump into you on the way. They probably say they're sorry and continue on their way. If they bump into your window, you might hear a muffled "I'm sorry." They're trying to just get in light in your house. So they represent this kind of, again, to me, I'm very much personifying this, but it's this ultimate group of humility. There are no famous Junebugs, but it is a fantastic nickname. I think it was Mitch Oss who suggested we do this episode a while back, and I thought, oh, that is a good idea. But then I thought, I don't really know anything about them other than I can probably call something a Junebug if I see it. But even then, but I'm glad I do now. I'm glad that Junebugs are around in my backyard and in the forest doing whatever Junebugs do. I'm sure at some point Junebugs will come into my life. Either I'll see another one on a nighttime bat survey, or I'll meet someone that's nicknamed Junebug, or maybe I'll name a pet Junebug. But either way, I think this might be one of my new favorite ordinary group of insects. And they do have those really cool antennae, but they just don't like to show them off. They don't come out very often, and they're there at night. So this is again a little bit of a different presentation of an insect, where usually it's kind of at the end, I still want to talk about this and this and this and this. I think I've told the story of the Junebug, at least from the information that I can find out there. And sometimes you just don't need to know the stories. And probably what the case is they don't want you to know the stories, or they don't care that you don't know their stories. And so that makes me kind of want to see them even more, and like, what really is going on in your mind. And again, as I'm super guilty of totally putting, anthropomorphizing and putting human traits into them, but that's what we do. That's how we filter the world through those kinds of lenses. So I'm also not sorry. But that's it. That's the story of the Junebug. And maybe this will give us a little bit of time if anybody does have some stories, or maybe not. Maybe we just end a little bit early today. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.